Hi, and welcome to this edition of Beyond the Law. In this edition of Beyond the Law, I'm discussing the fundamental rights to freedom of movement. There are many fundamental rights in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 12 in number, and the right to freedom of movement is one of the very significant fundamental rights in that Constitution. In this edition, I am doing a breakdown of these fundamental rights for the understanding of everybody. My name is Ekeminudim. I'm a legal practitioner. I am the host of this channel, and I'm always glad to know that you are there keeping me company. What does the Constitution say about the right to freedom of movement? To answer this, let's get straight to the provision of the Constitution as displayed on the screen for everybody to see, after which I will continue at the breakdown on this very provision of the Constitution. Section 40 of the Constitution, sub 1, provides every citizen of Nigeria is entitled to move freely throughout Nigeria and to reside in any part thereof, and no citizen of Nigeria shall be expelled from Nigeria or refused entry thereto or exit therefrom. As seen on the screen and as voiced over by myself, you can see clearly that the Constitution has given these rights to every person, every citizen of the country. And that implies that I have the right to move freely from one part of the country to another. So I can move freely from Sokoto State to Bayelsa State. I can move freely from Lagos State to Kaduna State. Someone can move freely from Kaduna State down to Cross River State, Abia State, Adamawa, any part of the country that you desire to go to. You have the rights given to you by the Constitution, and no one can stop you from enjoying that right. Now, you also have the right to move freely in your environment. You don't need to go outside the state. It is not until you go outside the state that you enjoy this right. So you can move freely within your area of residence and move from one village to another, from one street to another, from one room in your apartment to another, in your compound to another. It shows that every citizen of the country has the right to enjoy these very movements, free movement, without restriction whatsoever. Now, this is not just a local right, it's a global right. It's applicable to the African Charter. It's also applicable in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And therefore, the Constitution of Nigeria, domesticating this in Section 41, is basically giving a proclamation to what is already internationally recognized and what has already been internationally sanctioned. And so every citizen of Nigeria enjoys the rights to freedom of movement from one part of the country to another, from one place to another. Now, to every general rule, there are exceptions in law. Most general rules, there are exceptions. And therefore, there are exceptions to the right to freedom of movement. There are restrictions. The law recognizes some restrictions, and I will explain that. If you look at Section 41, sub 2 of the Constitution, it says that nothing shall invalidate a law validly made for the purpose of arresting and restricting the movement of someone who has been found, who has been suspected to have committed an offense. And so, if the movement of that person is restricted to make it impossible for him to abscond from Nigeria and to make him stay in Nigeria and face the law, that restriction of his movement is allowed in law. The Constitution allows it. Because that restriction is to make him be around to face the law squarely and not run away from justice. The second instance is where someone has committed an offense outside Nigeria and then he runs back to Nigeria, and the country where the offense was committed needs him to be extradited and sent back to them for trial and for punishment. Nigeria has an obligation to hand over such a person, and so arresting the person for purpose of sending him back to the country by way of extradition does not amount to an infringement of the right to freedom of movement. However, the Constitution of Nigeria has stated that before that can be done, there must be bilateral agreement between this country and Nigeria before the extradition of a Nigerian citizen can be done. In some instances, the extradition passes through a judicial process where someone is tried in a court of law. If there are laws permitting that, that is done. Now, that period where someone is made to pass through that trial for extradition does not in any way amount to a breach of his fundamental rights to freedom of movement, because his fundamental right to freedom of movement at that interval is curtailed for purpose of following the due process of the law and for purpose of making him to face justice the way it should be. So these are the instances where the fundamental rights can be in a way curtailed. Nigeria can also get someone arrested and sent back to another country for him to go serve his prison time, having been found guilty by a court of law of competent jurisdiction in that country. Now, where that is done, the fundamental rights to freedom of movement is not in any way infringed upon. But generally, going back to the main essence of the right, the law simply says that you should not cage a human being like an animal. No cage should be made where human beings are packed in and not allowed to move freely. Every adult should be allowed to move freely, exercise his freedom, exercise his right to freedom of movement without undue restriction. Any restriction that is done without the approval of the law, any restriction that is not backed up by a law validly made in a democracy, that restriction will amount to an infringement of the fundamental right to freedom of movement of the Nigerian citizen. If that is done by the police will have to pay for it. If it is done by the army, by the DSS, by the civil defense, or by any other person, individuals can restrict the movement of other individuals. All this, when taken to the court, will give rise to a breach of the fundamental rights of freedom of movement of the citizen. And when that is pronounced upon by a court of law, damages will certainly follow. And I know that you would not want to pay damages for the restriction of the movement of the right, of the movement of any citizen of the country. I do hope you have learned one or two things about this fundamental right. I also hope that moving forward, our security agents will do the needful in compliance with the provisions of the law and not unduly restrict the fundamental rights of citizens, especially as regards the rights to freedom of movement. Thank you very much for watching this very episode of You and the Law. Continue to watch You and the Law. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already subscribed. And do remember to share this link to all your friends on the various social media platforms that you belong, so that from time to time we will know that we have a community of people sitting down together in the most informal of ways to learn about the basic principles of law to guide us in everyday living. Thank you and remain blessed.